The war is already over. China won. The West just hasn't realized it yet. While America was busy fighting wars in the Middle East for 20 years, burning trillions of dollars in the desert, China was quietly building something the world had never seen before. Not an empire, not a military superpower. Something far more powerful. An economic ecosystem so vast, so deeply embedded in every country on Earth, that removing it would collapse the global economy. By the time the West looked up from its wars, China had already positioned itself at the center of everything. This isn't about the future. This already happened. The game is over. We're just watching the scoreboard update. Let me show you how, what people believe vs reality. Here's what most people think is happening. China and America are competing. It's a race. Sometimes China is ahead. Sometimes America pulls forward. The winner isn't decided yet. That's the story you'll hear on the news. The comfortable narrative. But here's the reality no one wants to say out loud. China isn't trying to beat America at America's game. They're playing a completely different game. One America doesn't even understand yet. America measures power in aircraft carriers and military bases. China measures power in who controls the supply chain. America spends $1 trillion a year on defense. China spends $1 trillion connecting 70% of the world's population to Chinese infrastructure. America fights wars. China builds roads. And roads, it turns out, are far more powerful than missiles. Point 1. China owns the supply chain. Let's start with something most people don't think about. Where stuff comes from. Your phone, your laptop, your shoes, your medication, the solar panels on your neighbor's roof, the batteries in electric cars. Almost all of it comes from China, or depends on Chinese materials, or gets assembled using Chinese machinery. This didn't happen by accident. In the 1990s and 2000s, Western companies moved manufacturing to China because it was cheaper. Labor was cheap, regulations were flexible, profits went up. Everyone thought this was a great deal for the West. Cheap products, higher margins. What could go wrong? Here's what went wrong. China didn't just become a factory, it became the factory. It didn't just make products. It built the entire ecosystem. The supply chains, the raw materials processing. Today, China controls 80% of global rare earth processing. These are the materials you need to make batteries, semiconductors, and missiles. China produces 70% of the world's solar panels. It manufactures 77% of the world's lithium-ion batteries. It controls the majority of global pharmaceutical ingredients. Imagine trying to fight an economic war with a country that controls your medicine. That's not competition. That's dependence. The West outsourced its production. China absorbed it. And now, it's leverage. Point 2. The Belt and Road Initiative. But here's where it gets even more interesting. While the West was focused on military alliances, China was building something completely different. The Belt and Road Initiative. It's the largest infrastructure project in human history. China has spent over $1 trillion building ports, railways, and highways. Over 150 countries have signed on. That's more than 70% of the world's population connected to Chinese-built infrastructure. Why does this matter? Because infrastructure isn't just roads and bridges. It's influence. When China builds a port in Pakistan, that port runs on Chinese technology, financed by Chinese banks. When China builds a railway across Africa, African countries depend on China for maintenance, upgrades, expansion. When China lays fiber optic cables connecting Asia to Europe, it controls a piece of the internet itself. This isn't aid. This isn't charity. This is strategic positioning. And here's the genius part. It's not military. You can't bomb a trade route and call it victory. You can't sanction a highway. America built its global influence through military power. Bases in 80 countries. Naval dominance, the ability to project force anywhere. China is building its influence through economic integration, and economic integration is far harder to undo than a military alliance. If a country has a military base, you can ask them to leave. If a country owns your ports, your railways, your power grid, what do you do? You depend on them. That's the game China is playing. And they're winning. Point 3. The digital Silk Road, but it gets even deeper. China isn't just building physical infrastructure. They're building digital infrastructure. This is called the Digital Silk Road. Huawei, the Chinese telecom giant, has built 5G networks in over 170 countries, and it's controlled by a Chinese company. WeChat, China's super app, is used by over 1 billion people for messaging, payments, shopping, government services. Chinese facial recognition technology is installed in cities across Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. Chinese AI companies are selling surveillance systems to governments that can't afford Western technology. China is embedding itself into the digital infrastructure of the planet. And here is why. This matters more than people realize. Whoever controls the infrastructure controls the data. And whoever controls the data controls the future. America dominated the 20th century because it controlled oil. China is positioning itself to dominate the 21st century by controlling data and technology infrastructure. The West is just starting to realize this, and it's already too late to catch up. Point 4. Economic dependence. Let's talk about something uncomfortable. The West, especially America, loves to talk about standing up to China, human rights, trade practices, geopolitical aggression. But here is the problem. The West can't afford to actually fight China economically. China's economy is too big, too connected, too essential. China is the largest trading partner for over 120 countries. More than the United States. Europe does more trade with China than with America. Even America's biggest companies, Apple, Tesla, Nike, Starbucks, depend on China for manufacturing and customers. If America tried to truly decouple from China, it would cause an economic depression. Inflation would skyrocket. Supply chains would collapse. Entire industries would shut down. China would be hurt too. But here is the difference. China's government can control its population through authoritarian means. America's government cannot. If the American people face 20% inflation and unemployment, they'll vote out their leaders. China doesn't have that problem. This asymmetry is power. China can endure pain that democracies cannot. And they know it. Point 5. The yuan and the one that changes everything. For 80 years, the US dollar has been the world's reserve currency. Oil is traded in dollars. International debts are paid in dollars. Central banks hold dollars. This gives America an enormous advantage. It can print money and export inflation. It can sanction countries by cutting them off from the dollar system. The dollar is a weapon, and America has used it effectively. But China has been quietly undermining it. China has been signing trade deals with countries to use the yuan instead of the dollar. Russia and China now trade in yuan and rubles, not dollars. Saudi Arabia is now accepting yuan for oil payments. Brazil and China are bypassing the dollar entirely. Over 30 central banks now hold yuan reserves. This is called Dedollarization, and it's happening faster than most people realize. If the dollar loses its status, America loses its greatest geopolitical weapon. It would be the biggest shift in global power since World War II, and China is actively making it happen. The twist. This isn't about defeating America, but here is the part that most people miss. China isn't trying to replace America. They're not trying to be the global hegemon the way America was. China doesn't want to spread democracy or enforce a world order or be the world's police. They just want to be secure, influential, economically dominant in their region and beyond. They want a world where no one can threaten them, where they control the economy, and they've already built it. The Belt and Road Initiative, the Digital Silk Road, supply chain dominance. Make yourself so essential that confrontation becomes impossible. China is building a world where fighting them isn't an option. That's smarter. Conclusion, the game is over. So here is the uncomfortable truth. The competition between China and the West isn't a race. It's already over. China won, not because they have a bigger military, but because they control the things that actually matter. Supply chains, infrastructure, technology, trade relationships, economic dependence. While America was fighting wars, China was building the future. And by the time America realized what was happening, it was already too late. You can't reverse 30 years of economic integration overnight. You can't rebuild supply chains. That took decades. You can't compete with $1 trillion infrastructure project when you're $1 trillion in debt. The West can still adapt. It can still build alliances. It can still innovate. But it can't go back to the world where it was the unquestioned center. That world is gone. China didn't defeat the West militarily. It just made itself indispensable. And indispensable is more powerful than dominant. Hit that like button and subscribe to Axis Lens for more stories that reveal the power shifts most people miss. Next one's ready. Don't miss. Don't miss.